The silence in Sunspear had never felt so loud. News of Prince Oberyn Martell's death reached Dorne faster than the ravens could carry it. It wasn't just that he was killed, it was how. His skull crushed like fruit in front of thousands, a foreign trial, a Lannister courtroom, and, worst of all, justice undone by arrogance and bloodlust. The Red Viper of Dorne was gone, and with him, every last trace of diplomacy the Martells had ever offered the Iron Throne. Princess Ellaria Sand screamed when she heard. Not wept, screamed. Her cry echoed through the water gardens like a banshee's curse. The sand snakes, Obara, Nymeria, and Tieni, stood motionless, eyes narrowed, as their mother's rage filled the palace. Prince Doran Martell sat quietly in his chair, his gout-swollen feet wrapped in silks. He said nothing, for hours, until finally he whispered to his advisor, Areo Hotar, "Prepare the banners." Areo blinked. "Your Grace?" "War," Doran said, his voice shaking. "They have murdered my brother. They will answer for it." The courtyards of Sunspear erupted into chaos. Horns blared. Armies were summoned from Starfall to the Stormland's edge. For generations, Dorne had kept out of the affairs of the realm, even during Robert's rebellion. Now they were marching. The Sun and Spear would ride north, but this war would not be fought by knights in shining armor. No. Dorne had waited, watched, and planned for too long. They had spies in King's Landing, loyalists among the Stormland's houses, even whispers from Highgarden's shadows, and they had something no other kingdom had: venom. Dorne would not strike with brute force. It would poison the realm from within. Cersei Lannister did not take the news seriously at first. "Dorne," she laughed, sipping from a goblet of wine. "Let them march. Let them burn in their sand boots and die at the Mander. The Martells have always barked louder than they bite." But Tyrion didn't laugh. "You didn't see his face," he said softly. "Oberyn wasn't just a warrior. He was a symbol. You killed their symbol, and symbols they don't die quietly." Tommen, young and scared, barely spoke. Marguerite Tyrell had begun to notice his shaking hands. Even the High Sparrow had started whispering sermons about southern fire rising. By the time the Dornish fleet was sighted off the shores of Blackwater Bay, the Red Keep realized it was no bluff. Over 20,000 men had crossed the narrow sea in sleek black ships, flying the Sun and Spear banner. Obara Sand rode at the head of them, a spear in one hand, Oberyn's armor tied to her saddle. King's Landing panicked. Sunspear's message to the Iron Throne was brief. "You took one prince, we'll take 10. You spilled our blood in your capital. Now we'll drown your streets in it." And true to that promise, fires began to light across Westeros, not from the ships, but from the inside. Tyene Sand had infiltrated the capital, posing as a maid in the Sept of Baelor. Nymeria was hiding in the brothels near Flea Bottom, turning whispers into weapons. Dornish gold greased every palm it needed to. The Lannisters prepared for battle. But it wasn't the kind of war they knew. There were no lines, no horns, no honor, just blood, just revenge. And high atop Sunspear, Prince Doran watched the flames begin to spread, his calm finally shattered. "They called us weak for refusing war," he said to Areo Hotar. "Now, they will learn what it means to be patient." The gates of King's Landing had never looked so vulnerable. By the third week of the Dornish incursion, the capital city had turned into a furnace of fear. Whispers filled every alley, spreading faster than wildfire rumors. Who had been poisoned now? Which Lannister bannerman had gone missing? Why was the Sept closed at night? Even the gold cloaks, usually so brutal and cocky, looked over their shoulders while patrolling. Obara Sand led the Dornish vanguard straight to the Stormlands, cutting through the outer houses like fire through parchment. House Selmy resisted. Now its banners hung upside down, and its castle gates were torn down to the studs. No survivors, no mercy. But Prince Doran Martell didn't want open war just yet. Not fully. Not until every crack in the lion's den had widened. He wanted Cersei to drown in her own paranoia first, and she did. Inside the Red Keep, Cersei paced like a cornered beast, her face thin, her eyes wild. Her brother Jaime had warned her, "You've turned Oberyn into a martyr. Now you've given Dorne a cause." She slapped him hard. You think this is my fault? No, Jaime said coldly, rubbing his jaw. I think it's your arrogance that's lit this fire, and now even wildfire can't put it out. The High Council meetings grew more desperate with every sunrise. Varys had vanished. Pycelle was too old to understand what was happening. Mace Tyrell wanted to retreat his armies to protect Highgarden, not King's Landing. Even Kevan Lannister spoke, with a tremble. They're inside our walls, he admitted one night. Someone in the kitchens, 3 servants dead. No signs of entry, just blood and a Dornish dagger. Sir Gregor Clegane, still half monster from Qyburn's experiments, was now guarding Tommen personally. But that only worsened things. The boy king couldn't sleep with that silent beast looming over his bed. His fear smelled like meat in the throne room, ripe and raw. But the worst blow hadn't even come yet. On the 19th day, the small council received word. Casterly Rock had been attacked, not by a frontal assault, not by a siege. No, the enemy was already inside. Vassals, servants, guards, poisoned bread, slit throats. By the time the Raven arrived, the castle had lost 3 Lannisters, including 2 cousins of Tywin. The Rock was holding, but barely. And sitting in a dark tent outside the Reach, Ilaria Sand smiled bitterly. She wasn't interested in ruling the realm. She didn't want thrones, she wanted pain. She wanted the realm to feel what she felt the moment Oberyn's head cracked like fruit under Gregor's thumb. She rode with Obara, her eyes hollow, her voice quiet. We will not stop at justice. We will take their legacy. And she meant it. The sand snakes spread like wildfire across Westeros. Tyene charmed her way into noble courts, poisoning from within. Nymeria, draped in shadow, strangled a lord commander of a minor garrison in his sleep. Obara turned Storm's End into a slaughterhouse. No ravens flew back from the south. The Lannister lines were cracking. And somewhere far in the east, across the sea in Meereen, a queen with dragons heard whispers of a Martell rebellion. Daenerys Targaryen read the letter twice. The lion. Flit? She asked, almost in disbelief. Missandei nodded. Worse, the lion is being hunted. And just like that, a flame lit in Dany's eyes. Perhaps Westeros wasn't so far away anymore. Perhaps the time was now. But Dorne wasn't fighting for her. Not yet. They were fighting for Oberyn, for Elia. For blood that was spilled and never answered. And no army, no gold, no crown could stop people who had been waiting for revenge this long. The walls of King's Landing weren't built to hold back shadows. As the war dragged into its 2nd month, the capital had stopped sleeping. Every knock at the door, every whisper in the dark, felt like a dagger ready to slip between ribs. The people didn't know who to fear more, the Dornish ghosts haunting the alleys, or their own queen who had become a tyrant cloaked in desperation. Cersei had doubled the city guard. Anyone with even a trace of Dornish blood was rounded up, questioned, tortured, or simply vanished. The streets stank of fear and sweat, and trust had become a dead man's name. But Dorne wasn't interested in holding land. They weren't playing the Game of Thrones the way others had. No banners raised on conquered castles, no victories. Sung, only funerals, only grief. That's what made them so terrifying. Tommen Baratheon, the boy king, barely spoke anymore. His chambers were like a tomb. Every morning he asked the same question. Has she come back yet? He meant Margaery. The Queen of Thorns had pulled her granddaughter back to Highgarden under the guise of safety. But even Olenna Tyrell knew it was a retreat. The Reach was holding, but barely. Dornish riders had begun torching villages along the borders, only to vanish into the hills the next night. Mace Tyrell's army hadn't won a single real battle. Every time they marched, they returned lighter. Fewer horses, fewer men. No victories, no bodies. In the Red Keep, Jaime Lannister sat with Qyburn at the edge of the war room. Maps lay torn and wine-stained. The lines of Westeros were bleeding red ink. We cannot keep this city together, Jaime muttered, eyes tired. We're not fighting an army, we're fighting a ghost. Qyburn, ever calm, simply replied, Then we must become something worse than ghosts. And he meant it, for in the deepest part of the dungeons, Qyburn's twisted experiments had begun again. Whispers spoke of caged beasts, of captured men, used for something darker than torture. Something meant to kill without mercy or memory, a solution for an enemy who wouldn't fight in the open. But Dorne wasn't waiting for traps. They were preparing for a single blow, one that would break the realm. Oberyn Sand and her sisters were already riding north. Their target wasn't the throne, not yet. It was Riverrun. The Riverlands were weak, torn between Freys and Tullys, soaked in betrayal. And where there is confusion, there is opportunity. Lord Edmure Tully, freed from the Freys by mysterious riders weeks earlier, stood now in his own hall, rebuilt and surrounded by banners with no names. Dornish gold had bought him freedom. Now it bought his loyalty. Edmure sat before a small fire when Oberyn entered. She didn't bow, didn't offer pleasantries. She just said, "We bleed the lion from all sides. Your house has no love for them." He looked at her with broken eyes. "What would you have me do? Open your gates. House Tully rises again, not for the throne, for vengeance." Edmure nodded once. "They took my niece. I'll take their kingdom." Riverrun's gates opened. Dornish spears entered. The north of King's Landing was now vulnerable. Inside the Red Keep, the news hit like wildfire. Cersei screamed at her council, throwing a goblet across the room. "They're aligning with traitors. Dorne has bought the Riverlands." Kevan Lannister replied quietly. "They didn't buy them. They understood them." Outside the gates, the city's poor began to riot. Bread was gone, wine was hoarded. Gold cloaks beat protesters, but nothing could stop the smell of collapse. And across the sea, Daenerys Targaryen began preparing ships. She sent a raven south. One message: "Dorne has courage. The dragon remembers." Ellaria read it in silence, then burned it. She wasn't ready to bend the knee. Not yet. But allies in the east, that she would consider. And far to the north, Jon Snow heard whispers of dawn rising. He said nothing, but the memory of Elia Martell lingered in Winterfell's halls like an old wound. The realm was unraveling, and Dorne hadn't even drawn its full blade yet. The day the Red Keep's outer gates were breached wasn't with steel, but with screams. Hundreds of commoners had gathered for grain near the Sept of Baelor. Our charity day promised by the crown to soothe the people's unrest. But no grain came, no gold either. Only silence and the sight of the king's soldiers turning their backs on the crowd. That's when the first stone flew, then another. And then a guard struck a starving girl with the butt of his spear. Riots followed like thunder after lightning. By nightfall, the outer streets burned. Dornish agents, hiding as commoners, lit the spark. The Sand Snakes had studied more than poison. They understood resentment. The city hated the crown almost as much as Dorne did. It just needed a reason to rise. And now, it had one. Inside the Red Keep, panic ruled the halls. Tommen was kept hidden, the doors to his chambers sealed. Cersei stood over the map room like a mad queen reborn, eyes red, hair tangled, armor half-worn as she screamed at her council to take back the city. "They're rats," she hissed. "Burn them if you must. Use wildfire again. I don't care." Jaime stood across from her, arms crossed. "Wildfire in the capital, you'd kill the boy." She didn't blink. Then he dies a king. For the first time in his life, Jaime saw it. Not madness creeping into her soul, but madness rooted, deep like weeds in cracked stone. Cersei wasn't losing the throne. She was losing herself. Qyburn stepped forward with cold certainty. "Let me handle the city, Your Grace. The people don't fear gold, they don't fear law, but they will fear what I've made." And he unleashed it. At midnight, strange beasts roamed Flea Bottom, men with no faces. Screams came from alleys where no shadows should have been. Whatever Qyburn had been growing in the dungeons of the Red Keep, it had teeth, and it knew hunger. By morning, half the slums were silent. No blood, no bodies, just silence. The people feared the Sand Snakes, but now they feared their queen more. But Cersei's cruelty had played into Dorne's hands again. Ellaria Sand sent word to the Reach, to the Stormlands, to the Riverlands. "The throne slaughters the innocent to protect the guilty. We will not." And house after house, minor ones at first, then greater, began turning. House Caron, House Penrose, even House Tarly, once proud allies of the Lannisters, withdrew their support from the crown. Lord Randil Tarly sent a raven. "We do not fight for madness, nor poison. Let the fire eat itself." But perhaps the most unexpected message came from the Vale. Robin Arryn, under the influence of Peter Baelish, sent an envoy south. "The Vale will not interfere. Let the lion and the serpent bleed one another dry." Dorne had isolated Cersei. The Crown's only hope now lay in the Iron Islands, cold, faithless Euron Greyjoy, whose ships were rumored to be sailing with a dark alliance of his own. But even Euron didn't move fast enough, or maybe he didn't care. He loved chaos more than crowns. The Sand Snakes moved again. This time their target wasn't a castle or a stronghold, it was the Sept of Baelor. At dawn, hundreds of Dornish agents disguised as pilgrims entered the square. No weapons, no banners, just silent mourning faces. The High Sparrow, already wary of Cersei's tyranny, allowed them in. He believed in peace, in redemption. He died first. Tyene Sand slit his throat in the prayer chamber. The guards were dead, before they touched their swords. And then the Sept burned. Flames roared as one of the oldest and holiest symbols in Westeros crumbled. Not from wildfire, from rage. The Seven had failed the people. Now Dorne would replace them with something else. Vengeance. By nightfall, a Dornish banner was draped over the smoking ruins. The crowd didn't fight it. They cheered. Ellaria Sand, watching from a rooftop far away, said only one thing. "Oberyn, do you see us now?" And far away across the Narrow, Daenerys Targaryen set sail, because now Westeros was truly broken, and she was coming to rule the Ashes. The Iron Throne had become a grave, not just for kings, but for the idea of kingship itself. As black smoke curled from the ruins of the Sept, and the common folk roamed freely through parts of King's Landing once held by noble blood, a hush settled over Westeros. Not peace, just exhaustion, fear, the kind that comes when you realize nothing sacred exists anymore, not gods, not thrones, not family. Cersei Lannister stood alone in the throne room, her hair matted to her face, her armor stained with old wine and older blood. The Iron Throne loomed behind her, untouched now for days. She didn't sit. "Not anymore," she whispered. "They think they've won, but they don't know what they've unleashed." Jaime had left her, not with a fight, not even with words, just walked away. One morning he was there, the next he was gone, riding north, towards some forgotten honor he still clung to. Only Qyburn remained, and Sir Gregor, who no longer had thoughts of his own, but even Qyburn had started looking at her like something to be feared, not followed. And still. The city burned. The Dornish banners now flew openly in the lower districts. Oberyn Sand patrolled the streets not as a conqueror, but as a warden. The people didn't resist her. Some even offered her bread, water, flowers. In a city that had only ever known Lannister boots, a Martell spear felt like justice. Tyene controlled the Red Temple, now draped in sun and spear silk. Her followers called her the Blood Saint. Her sermons were quiet, dangerous. She spoke not of gods, but of debts. Of fire owed, of justice unfinished. Ellaria, though, had gone silent. She hadn't returned to Sunspear. She hadn't even returned to the war camps. She was beneath the Red Keep, in the black cells, and in front of her was Tommen. He sat across from her in silence, a boy barely clinging to manhood, his crown gone, his face thin with hunger and fear. Ellaria didn't touch him, didn't harm him, just stared. "You're not the enemy," she said finally, voice like glass. Tommen said nothing. "But you wear the blood of the people who murdered Elia Martell, who crushed Oberyn's skull, who made monsters and called them kings." He looked down. "I never wanted any of this." "That's the problem," she replied. "Your whole family took everything, and not one of you ever really wanted it." She stood, walked to the bars. "You will live, but you will never rule again." And she walked away. Tommen never saw her again. By the time Daenerys Targaryen's fleet landed at Dragonstone, the war was all but over. Dorne controlled the capital in all but name. The Reach had withdrawn. The Riverlands were loyal to Sunspear's gold. The North, still under. Jon Snow watched with caution but didn't interfere. And Cersei, she finally sat on the Iron Throne once more, not in glory, in ruin, a single goblet in her hand, dressed in black. Her father dead. Her children gone. Her lover abandoned her. Her enemies at the gates. When Ellaria finally entered the throne room, her boots echoing on the cold stone, Cersei didn't rise. "You've come to kill me?" the queen asked, voice dry. "No," Ellaria said. "Killing you would be mercy." Cersei laughed, a dry, broken sound. "What then? You want me to beg?" "I want you to watch," Ellaria whispered, "as this city rises again without you. As the world forgets your name, I want you to live long enough to hear children laugh in the streets that used to scream for your blood." And with that, Ellaria turned. Cersei never spoke again. Not to her, not to anyone. She remained on that throne unmoving, even when Dorne declared the birth of a new southern alliance. No more kings, no more Iron Throne. Westeros would fracture, each region ruled by its own people, not by dragons, not by lions. Dorne didn't claim the crown. They destroyed it, piece by piece, and in the courtyard of the Red Keep, where the blood of Martells had once stained the stones, Oberyn Sand planted a tree, a red blossom. "Native only to Sunspear. Let them remember," she said, her voice quiet, "not the war, the reason for it." And so the legacy of Oberyn Martell lived, not in vengeance alone, but in change, in the ashes of a kingdom that thought it could kill a people and walk away untouched. The lion roared, but the sun has scorched everything it left behind.